Hey, what's going on, everybody? Just jumping on the stream real quick. We have an hour to chat about everything and anything you want. Hey, how's it going? I'm BirdDogJon. Welcome, welcome. I see a few of you guys hanging around, and that's cool. Thanks for coming to hang out today. Had an issue with Restream today, but that's okay. I think we sorted it out. It kept asking me what stream I was interested in, so I kept clicking other. And it didn't go away until I actually started the stream, and then I clicked it, and then it went away. So that's not a super intuitive way to ask your streamers what they're interested in, but what is going on, Evan? How are you? Good to see you. Welcome. Changed my format a little bit on Streamlabs, so I've got my mixer on one side and then my mini feed on another, and then below that I've got my actual scenes and my sources. So I give this a go for a few days and see how that goes. A few streams. So far I like it. It's a good little layout. Got my headphones today, which is nice. I didn't have them the other day, so I had to... My monitors are doing something weird. I have 4-inch Mackie monitors, and I really like them. Let's see if... Okay, so I really like them. However, the little switch on the back that differentiates between what position they're in, left or right, seems to have like a loose contact, and so they keep cutting out. Actually, one of them keeps cutting out, and so it's super annoying. So headphones is the way to go, and also you don't get the feedback issues that you sometimes would otherwise. Makes it a little bit cleaner. Room is otherwise quiet, so that's good stuff. Okay, so I've been toying around with calling today's stream something very specific, and what I want to really name it is Just Say No to Static Networks. Good golly, I have had a ton of people reaching out to me about, hey, I've got, things set up a certain way, and the BirdDog camera or the studio or whatever isn't being seen. Actually, the big one is I have a keyboard that can't find any sources. And I've helped like 3 or 4 people in the past, just this week alone. So that was only yesterday and today. I've helped these people sort through their issues. This is crooked here, hang on. So I've been helping these folks sort through their issues, and it's always, every time it's been a static network. So I really feel like I want to go on record here and just kind of explain a little bit what our mentality is when it comes to actually static networks and how they work and how they don't work, because I know we've talked about it briefly before in the past, but I feel like it'll be a really helpful understanding of networks, especially if you're a broadcast person and not a network person or a IT guy. Understanding the difference between static networks and DHCP networks. And the issue is, to sum it up real fast, is static networks is not manual control. That's not what static networks are. Static networks are like the lack of networks. Okay, it's the lack of brain power. So it's a big difference between manual control and a lack of processing power. Huge difference, and I want to talk about it. Evan, so we're looking at purchasing a few Blackmagic Pocket P4 4Ks or Z cams. Do you know if anyone has tried the Flex 4K with these? I don't know if anyone's tried Flex 4K with those. I know Blackmagic outputs their own little flavor of HDMI, so you may want to ask the group, the Facebook user group, which I can dump here in the chat for you. I might be able to dump it here in the chat if my stream deck would actually work. Come on, Bueller. Okay, here we go. For those of you who are not in that group, you need to be. And so check out this little, I'll try the use group. I remember. Awesome. yeah, check them out. See if anybody else is using it, because that's a third-party product. So we don't necessarily like get every product in the world and bring them into the head office and test them with BirdDog stuff. We output with the HDMI standards that have been published forever, and we test it against stuff, but usually against BirdDog products, right? So cameras and a bunch of other stuff. So we also usually test it against vMix and TriCaster, because we actually have those. So that's usually pretty good. But in terms of just like third-party cameras, I know a lot of people are using Panasonics, but they're outputting to HDMI and then going into Flex to get full NDI. That's fine. Panasonic develops their software their own way, though. So, and that's the same thing with, that's a big thing with Control, is Panasonic uses Visca IP. But remember, there are all sorts of flavors of Visca IP, and so they don't use, like the Panasonic controllers or the PTZ Optics controller, so that software controller they have doesn't talk to other cameras using Visca IP, because a lot of people use the Sony Visca IP, BirdDog in particular, and other companies also use other flavors of Visca IP, and they're not compatible, not perfectly compatible. So I know people have been really frustrated with that, and I understand. I can sympathize with that. Holy monkey, my microphone is hot. All right, let's bring this down just a shade. I mean, I've got my volume at full throttle there, but anyway, let me know how the audio sounds on your side, guys. I appreciate that. Every week you jump in and let me know. So anyway, so today I wanted to talk about static networks and why I strongly advise against them. It's not that they can't be done and they can't be used, but they really shouldn't be implemented if you don't know enough about networking to do it properly. The difference between, hey, thanks, Bursky, I appreciate it. Not clipping, but was hot. So that's all of my processing that I got going on. So I've got all sorts of room, and yeah, it's pretty toasty. So maybe I'll turn that down. Maybe try not to. Geez, I need this a little more low end on this microphone. This shotgun microphone's great, except it's and maybe it may be my headphones, because there's pretty much no low end in these ones. Anyway, so so I want to go over static networks and why you just say no, and instead purchase and implement a correct actual data network to do NDI. In general, NDI is a high performance video protocol, and so what we're doing is we're sending video very quickly over the network at low latency and at high bit rates, across networks or across subnets, actually, or maybe across cloud or something like that, where we're transmitting from one location and pulling it down somewhere else in the world on another. And as long as you have things set up correctly, it's usually not an issue. Where we run into problems is when we strip away the network and we just get hang on one second. All right, so we take our network, or we decide, okay, I'm just going to implement my own, just going to give everything a static IP address, and I'm just going to plug everything into a switch, and then they'll just talk to each other that way. That's not really how networks work. I mean, on paper, that is how it should work, but it doesn't actually. I have an old non-PoE Netgear switch here that's just super old and doesn't supply power, and it really only maxes out at 10100, and so it's not really great for full NDI, which is why it's not in the system. But switches like this that you don't log into and manage, that you basically plug in and it creates 16 additional ports or 15 additional ports for you to basically split out the IP information. Unmanaged switches make a couple of assumptions. First of all, you're not really trying to do anything that's super super network heavy, okay? So unmanaged switches kind of make an assumption that this is a non-critical installation because you're purchasing a very non-secured device. In short, you can't go in, you can't shut down ports, you can't VLAN anything, you can't do anything that is pretty much basic security for a switch. So an unmanaged switch, if you're purchasing one, it's just kind of assuming that you're using it for a non-secure operation. The second piece is that you're using it for not necessarily a high performance situation. So, Netgear make a wide range. I'm just picking on them, but there's all sorts of switches out there. I'm just going to put this away now. There are all sorts of switches out there that are unmanaged. I even have one here in my system, but it's not on my NDI network anymore. And the primary reason we don't use unmanaged switches is, first of all, in a static network, they don't operate correctly. And I'll explain that in a minute. And second of all, because you're plugging into an unmanaged switch, if you ever have network issues, there's really no way to test if the information is getting across the network correctly, because there's no way to log in. You can do Wireshark and you can do packet tracing and a few other things, but that really doesn't give you what you need to know about the performance of the destination, my computer or my camera in this instance, to the, so my source, the source is the camera, all the way to the computer, which is the destination. So if I can't examine what's going on in terms of how it's passing through the switch, if I don't have access to it, if I don't have control of it, if I can't tell it to always operate in certain ways, I'm pretty much handcuffed in terms of support, because you can't do anything. You can look at the computer and then you can look at the camera, but the connection, the road between those two devices is pretty much, there's a lot of assumptions that have to be made, and you don't do that when you're running support or when you're even just trying to implement NDI. So I strongly suggest never looking at an unmanaged switch for your installation, because you are probably not going to plan to just have a test bench unless you're an installer. You're probably not planning just to have a test bench where you plug in devices, make sure they power up, make sure they're ready to go, set passwords and do a few things. Likely what you're here for is that you are looking at installing NDI devices on a network, and you want to do something with that video. That's kind of the whole purpose, right? So with that plan in mind, we need to properly set up the infrastructure to handle high performance video. My analogy that I have started using quite frequently is it's like buying a sports car. It's like investing in a sports car, right? Here's the P4K. This thing is 1-inch sensor, crazy camera, like unbelievable picture, and then like complaining about having to put premium gas in it or putting regular gas in it and wondering why you don't get performance out of it. So we don't do that to sports cars, and we don't do that to high performance video network devices. And NDI basically falls into the category of high performance video. Doesn't really matter what flavor you have, although full NDI is much more in terms of high performance. It's another step further than HX because of the high bit rate that it needs to process the video. But the trade-off is that you have 1.5 frames of latency, which is unheard of in an HX environment. So it has its benefits, but you do need to set it up correctly so that it will perform as you expect it to. Okay, so now we are going to talk about those static networks. Now, the reason why we don't install static networks, meaning we put in a switch and then we set everything to static, all of these devices, all of your NDI devices to static IPs, and I'll advocate for the other side as well, but there are valid reasons. The number one reason people like to put static IP addresses is that they know what the IP address is of the device. So, we set to 192.168.1.3 and then .4 and then .5 for all of our devices. And then we know we've assigned individual device IP addresses for these network devices. For things like computers and switches and variety like access points and things like that, things that are managing the network, static IPs make a lot of sense because you don't want those things changing. You don't want the IPs to fluctuate and that sort of thing. You want to keep them constant. And the desire to do this on a NDI network with your NDI devices is also obviously there's a strong desire because you don't want to lose our devices or have to search for them every time. But that's not really the way that you do this with NDI. And just, this is now some anecdotal, but a lot of experience testing everyone's network for the past couple of year and a half. When we set a static IP address on a NDI device, this is observation, but it seems to me that the NDI information does not get broadcast correctly to the remainder of the network. If you have a static network with an unmanaged switch, there is no routing data. And so the device is responsible for telling everybody what it is and who they are and at what resolution, and making sure that everybody knows there's NDI information available at this IP address. And it has to do that every time a request comes in, but also it does it at a regular interval. It also seems to me that it has to acquire all of that data on the network by itself as well, because there is no listed routing table that it can use. And we find this out in particular when people set static IP addresses and they don't put anything in the default gateway. What that does is it basically says nobody has any routing information, so there isn't an address to look at for any of that. When we connect to a device directly, I plug my PC directly into my camera. I go in and I set 192.168.100.123, and then 255.255.255.0, and then I usually set the default gateway address as the camera's address, 192.168.100.100. And what that does is it tells my computer, when you query the network, you should be able to find the available devices that are on this network. Now remember, it's just directly plugged in, so there's only one device at this address. So not only when you type it into the web browser, 192.168.100.100, it will look for that address, but it will also query that address, looking and saying like, hey, you have information on devices that are on this network. And the camera should come back and say, here's the web UI, here's what I know. And it'll only know its own address. It won't, the baseboards in these, the NIC cards in these do not have routing tables, memory allocated for navigating networks, none of that. Its job is to broadcast the IP information of the device, but the camera reserves all of its brain power for generating and encoding NDI. That's its job. Its job is not to navigate networks. Its job is to encode networks. So, or encode video and make it available on the network. So with that being said, I don't know who's calling me at this time. With that being said, we don't want to make the device have to do a job that it's not required, that it shouldn't be required to do, and we shouldn't expect it to navigate on networks on its own. Okay, we have to provide that information for it because it's already doing an unbelievable job at encoding video at 1 frame latency, which is like never been done before. Okay, let's put this out there. This is new technology. We're asking the camera to do unbelievable things. We don't need to add more stuff to its plate. So let's let the network do the network stuff, which means that we need to have a proper DHCP service set up. We need to have a proper DNS running on the network. We need to have a sophisticated enough network that if you do want to assign IP addresses to cameras, we can actually do that within the network, and it'll make it a lot more stable too. So the way we do that is we get a gateway or a router or something like that. So one that you understand, maybe one that has a lot of YouTube videos that you can help yourself set up and get in and kind of set things up as you want them. But then going beyond that is we want to be able to go into the router. You need something like, you need DHCP service on the router, which will just issue IP addresses in a range that you specify. We need, hopefully, a DHCP reservation list. That would be very helpful. And we need the ability to do port forwarding or something like that. Bursky's just chimed in. Oh, we have separate NDI VLANs with DHCP, which do not set default gateway to NDI devices, which works, but we can test it out again if it helps. So if you have a DHCP network, but you're not broadcasting the default gateway information, which is a little bit strange because it would probably just be the router, right? Because that will possess all of the DHCP routing information that you want. Then I would point the default gateway on the NDI devices to a PC that's on the system. Mainly because Windows 10 actually has an internal routing table built into it. It helps it quickly resolve, IP addresses. And so it keeps an ongoing routing table inside. I'm sure Macs do it, but I haven't tested it and I don't have time to do that. So Windows 10 machine on the network, and you can point the default gateways at that machine, and you should actually get much more stable information. Because what that does is when the device wants to know where and who it is, and it needs to tell the network what it's got, it will broadcast to that IP address, and that IP address will continually update and refresh and collect that data. So just not having a default gateway causes routing issues, causes network problems. It can result in packet collisions. It can result in a bunch of things. And so if you don't have one, it's very hard for anyone who does know NDI networking to help you because you don't have the system set up kind of at the minimum. And static networks, to be honest with you, I rarely entertain troubleshooting a static network without routing tables because the guidelines say it's highly recommended that you run a DHCP service on your network. Those guidelines were made in 2017. I would say now, and I can actually back this up because I have a couple of friends with new tech that would agree with me, that there's really no reason why you should be running a static network without a DHCP service. Like if you're serious about implementing NDI, you need to have a proper, again, it's the sports car and the gasoline conversation. You don't buy a Lamborghini and gripe about having to buy premium gas. You just don't. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. Okay, so if you have a sophisticated enough router, one that's relatively up to date, inside the router, there's going to be something called the DHCP reservation list or something similar. You can Google it and find out what your router calls it. Everybody has a little different flavor and wordage. I wish that people would just decide and let everything have the same name, but that would be too easy. So some are called something different, but what you're looking for is traditionally in the networking world called the DHCP reservation list. And what this does is it allows you to select the MAC address that's currently on the network and then tell it, if you ever see this MAC address appear and asking for an IP address, give it this IP. So now we can go in and we can tell the router, which is the brains of the network, when you see NDI devices, when this MAC address shows up, assign it this IP address, always. What that does is it removes that IP address from your network until it sees that device, but it will wait around for that device to come online. And when it does, the DHCP reservation list will send that IP request the same IP address every time all day until you change it or until the router dies. So what's good about that is we can leave our network device interfaces, our NDI devices, in DHCP mode. The device itself, the NIC card on board, will ask the network for the data for the information that it requires about the network. The router will send this data to the camera. The camera will think that it has been given a generated IP address. The DHCP reservation list, however, has assigned it that every time. And now, if our network is talking to the internet correctly, now, or just even set up correctly, now our NDI device will show up on the network correctly within the same subnet of all the other devices. This is super helpful because not only can you have a static network, but it's kind of the next level in terms of, we don't just go into the camera and click static and punch in the numbers. First of all, there's a lot of room for human error by doing that. I can't tell you how many cameras I have had to neuralize because the network settings were put in wrong, or the subnet mask was set to 255.255.0.0, or no default gateway information was put in, or the IP address was off by one character, or the period was moved over, so it was 192.168.10.09, which is a different address than 192.168.1.009. So we really need to eliminate the chance that you're going to get it wrong and just set up the network correctly. And quite honestly, there are so many self-help guides online about how do I set up this router to, to manage my home office. You can pretty much get away with that and use the router as long as it's a gigabit router, and use that to manage your NDI network. And it might set you back $100. Unify has a gateway that's like $135. I use that in an installation that I run every week. I never have a problem with it. And so it just powers up and off we go. I'm usually up and running within 15 minutes and ready to stream. So I did it when I wanted to force Windows Computer to route internet access to only specific NIC with multiple VLANs. The NDI VLANs don't have access to internet, for example. Okay. VLANs are fine. My only gripe and complaint, like a lot of guys use VLANs because they have Dante on one subnet and they have NDI on another, and they're using a double NIC card in a computer to handle one handling the Dante network, one handling the NDI network, and then they have a connection out to the internet on a third card or something like that. No problem. I get that. The only thing I don't like about VLANs is typically guys VLAN the switches and they don't isolate the switches. So VLANing a switch means that you're relying on the switch to still process all of the data across both networks. They're just separated by VLANs. Ideally, you would isolate, which means you'd buy a second switch, and then you can just go out the port into that other functioning network and use it that way. You could even separate them logically instead of physically within like routing software and that sort of thing. Again, Unify has a controller that does this. You can plug in multiple switches to the same controller but keep them on totally separate IP networks and stuff, and then that then leaves all of the processing power to the one job instead of splitting it between NDI and Dante and data. So you have 3 VLANs, 1, 2, 3, or 10, 20, 30, and respectively 10 is for NDI, 20 is for Dante, 30 is for internet, but the switch still has to do all of the packet traffic. And at some point, especially with high performance video, you will hit a threshold in which the switch can't process any more quick enough. So ideally you would isolate it. I think second best is to VLAN, because it's still technically an isolated network. It's just separated out. And then last but not least, you could run it all on the same switch but at different subnets. But you're playing Russian roulette at that point. And then static, which is not really an option. But I've had so many tickets since Thursday of people saying my keyboard doesn't work, and I say, okay, tell me about the network, and they say, well, I just gave it a static IP address. Everything has static, so I know what it is. And it's like, okay, what switch are you using? And they say something like, well, I just got a little 5-port switch and I plug everything into the wall. And I'm like, stop right there. Like, no, your network is insufficient for NDI. I had one person tell me that they looked at the guidelines, but it just says DHCP is recommended. And it's like, yes, it's recommended. Meaning, if you do something, that would be not recommended. So you're going to have these performance issues, is what it's saying. I was just like, yep, it is recommended. It comes recommended that you use DHCP. which would mean the other option that you're doing is not recommended. Read it that way. Is it glass half full or half empty? It's not recommended the way you're doing this. And they're like, well, it could still be done. I was like, nope, actually, not anymore. Anyway. Hey, what's going on, Pandorica? How are you? Welcome back. It's been a while. It's been a while since you've been on this channel. Anyway, you just have to kind of take it in stride sometimes. Today's show, if you're just joining us, is called Just Say No to Static Networks. Update title. Title. Just updated it. Oh, that's funny. Well, let's go check it out. Let's refresh this page. How's it going, people on Facebook? Thanks for joining me. You're curious about what I do, or this just sounds like a bunch of nerd talk? Well, you either made some assumptions and still joined because you knew what you're getting into since you knew me, or you don't know me at all and just realized now that I'm a nerd. So, hey, it's been a long time. Maybe strongly recommended or required. Okay, so here's the thing about the NDI world. Pandorica, you make a good point. Nobody in the NDI world is going to say required. Nobody is going to say, they might say strongly recommended. They will say recommended, but they won't say you should do this and shouldn't do that, because quite frankly, nobody wants to claim to be an expert, and that is frustrating. They want to be an expert in their own product, but because the products integrate with each other so much, no one's an expert. It's like working with a TriCaster, which is a new tech product, working with BirdDog, which is our product, working with Panasonic, they have their own NDI flavor, and PTZ Optics, which are also Panasonic cameras. And then there's Blackmagic, and there's, you know, all these other flavors. And they all have, like, when you, vMix is another one, Wirecast is another one. So they all talk to each other in different ways. And the vMix production software ingests video differently than TriCaster. Two totally different products, to be quite honest with you. And they both have their place, and they both have their pros and cons, but they do the same thing, but it's like a motorcycle and a car. They do the same thing. They transport somebody, but it's not the same thing. So nobody will say this is required for NDI, because quite frankly, you might be doing something, you might have all static networks, and they may all be working flawlessly for you, and this might be a very confusing conversation I'm having with you. But I'm telling you, if you're in the BirdDog game at all, you need to have a correct network set up. Just hands down. If you have network problems ever, we are going to want to look at layer 2 switches. If you say, I've got an unmanaged 5-port, can't help you. You know, I'll tell you to update the firmware on our device. I'll tell you to observe it in Studio Monitor, watch the network traffic, make sure that it's not peaking out, the general stuff. But to be honest, it's because you have no eyes on your network, and which means that unmanaged switches also regularly don't have brains, which is something that people don't realize, is that buying a layer 2 switch and buying an unmanaged switch, you're talking about you're talking about a machine that has the brain power to shape and control like flow processes, and one that's just quite literally like pass it as fast as I can, and whether or not that keeps up over long periods of time, I don't know. You have to call whoever made the switch, TP-Link, or oh my gosh. By the way, I will say this. I don't recommend TP-Link for NDI installations. I don't recommend D-Link for NDI installations, and I barely recommend new tech. I recommend New Tech for installations. I don't recommend Netgear, mainly because their high-end stuff is pretty good. Their layer 2, like mid-level business stuff is okay. But when you get down to like the $100 switches, it's like they have a little, actually I have a little unmanaged 8-port, it's a GS108 PP switch, which is, it's a PoE plus. It's got, I don't know, 60 watts in it maybe. It's okay, but there's a reason why I don't have it in my NDI network anymore. And the reason is that you can't diagnose anything. If there is an unmanaged switch on your network that is connected to your NDI stuff in any way, all bets are off because you have no way of clocking that data. So understand that it might work, but when it stops working, there's no real way for you to assess it and make sure that it's not the switch unless you replace the switch, which again, you just bought the right switch in the first place. Wouldn't have to have that conversation. And me as a support guy for BirdDog, I can't tell you to go out and buy new switches. Like, you come to me with support stuff, I'm gonna try and support the product itself. But then if you tell me, oh, well, it goes to an unmanaged switch and then into my computer, it's like, all right, well, I can verify, because we can plug the camera directly into the computer and bypass the switch. I can verify that the camera is working. But if you plug it into an unmanaged switch and then you're getting drop packets or frame freezes or something's going on, or if you're losing data and so it's having to re-request packets on a TCP network, you know, I can't really help you. So, okay, so that rant is over. And yeah, thanks for those of you who hung on, 8 of you, which is unbelievable. Because I get going, man. I'm gonna just get going. I don't stop. No, it dawned on me this weekend that we really need to talk about that because, yikes, getting a lot of requests for, you know, network schools and churches and things that don't have network admins, but they really need to like hire a computer company to come in and properly do it. And they need to hire a company that already understands high performance video over IP. I know there's a couple of companies out there that that I've encountered who are the go-to folks for, you know, the network for big churches. But when you start asking them to like dive deep into their switch settings and how are things set up and this, that, and the other, they don't know. So it's important that if you're gonna shop this out to somebody else, be sure that you talk to them about, hey, do you know about this? And also, because it's not regular, this is not regular network traffic, okay? This is constant video, constant data, leaving a device and going to a destination, and it needs to be happening in split seconds, you know, correctly all the time until you turn off the camera. So super important that they understand how video works over IP. Okay, so there was also I had a phone call yesterday for a guy who was setting up a new P400. They're shipping. They're like, this is got to be one of the first, this is, well, like the second P400 ticket I've ever had, because they are leaving manufacturing. They left last week, and so they're arriving at distributors this week, and they're getting into the hands of clients, and mostly retailers, you know, who are pre-setting them up for clients. So that's what this was. And he said, you know, I tried using Neuralizer, but I just couldn't get it to work. And I realized I really need to create a video about Neuralizer because there are some nuances that will help. It's fairly reliable these days. When it was first released, we had like a 50-50 success rate, but I've used it in several instances now where it's fairly reliable, and you know, it's a good little reset tool. The issue is because there isn't an onboard reset button on the cameras to like totally wipe the camera and start it over from factory. Partially because the way that the NDI chip is integrated into the camera, if you don't know this, here you go. There's the lens. The picture hits the lens. The lens turns that data into whatever the baseboard's using and sends it down the ribbons into the baseboard. The baseboard processes that information. It sends it as an output out the SDI, the HDMI, and the NDI chip. The NDI chip then takes it, goes one frame, encodes it into NDI, and sends it out the NIC card. So the SDI, the HDMI, and the NDI chip are all getting the same video at the same time from the baseboard. Then the NDI chip adds a frame and sends it out. So where we get one frame latency is off the SDI output. All right, that's the zero marker. So if you're saying, well, I walk across the stage and I can notice latency, you know, like I have all sorts of latency. There's lots of questions with that, but compare it to the SDI out. That's the marker. So SDI out, and then to the NDI chip is where that same video goes. NDI chip encodes, sends it out. So what had happened was my friend had changed it to DHCP and then couldn't find the camera. And so we set it up with Neuralizer, but instead with me on the phone, I had him plug it directly into the camera, set it up in Neuralizer, check the IP port configuration, make sure everything was good to go. So I'm going to make a video explaining a lot of that because it would probably help people out when they're in the throes of factory resetting their camera, just exactly how it's supposed to work. So Bursky, I have a strange problem with MikroTik. Oh boy, here's a switch I haven't had my hands on yet. Because when I run 3 BirdDog minis in on it, the packets are losing. Even switch is capable of just 500 megabit packets UDP. And when I compare packets per second to my tests, that's not even close. So I don't understand what's happening. NDI TCP is unstable at all with 2+ BirdDog NDI devices on it. It's weird that my cheap TP link can handle, but MikroTik is having huge issues with TCP traffic. There's a hardware chip, even when with the cleanest config, but I found that there's some issues with MikroTik, so I just don't know. I think I'll buy something more serious and we'll have to replace it. Okay, so that's an interesting find. So the assumption is that you've updated the MikroTik switch to the latest firmware because lots of updates happen all the time. I think in terms of the switching companies being persistent about their updates, personally, I know I've worked with many switches over the ages, but the one that is the most annoying to me is Unify. First of all, they have a user interface, and every time you log into it, if there's an update, it pops up a window that says there's an update for one of your devices. The problem is that Unify releases updates prior to them being baked in, and so sometimes you update your system and everything shuts down. And that was a common issue with when they moved to the most recent one, not the most recent firmware, but the most recent iteration of the firmware. I forget what that was called, but I have it here, so I guess I could just look. Devices. So the iteration of the switch firmware version is 4.3.21. So the iteration would be 4.0. So I came from like 3.14 or something like that, and I went to 4.0 on the gateway, and all my devices disconnected. You may remember from a previous streaming episode that I was explaining that all my devices kept dropping. They would provision, they'd come online, I'd adopt them, they'd provision, they'd set up, and then like within 3 minutes they would disconnect. They'd say heartbeat missed. And then I'd wait, give it like a couple hours, and then I'd come back to it and it would just say disconnected. The way that I fixed it, okay, so last Thursday I monkeyed around with it. We had some good suggestions here still, but so the irony is I logged off of the show and I was like, hey, thanks everybody, thanks for coming out. I shut down the stream, I looked at Unify, and all 3 said disconnected. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like I just redid all of these. I held the factory switch, I did all that. So what fixed it was that afternoon a cloud key showed up because I ordered one last week, and for like $110 you can buy a cloud key and you plug that into this, and then you link your cloud key to your account on the Unify website, onto your Unify Ubiquity account. Say discover cloud key, it will show up, you adopt that, and then you adopt the switches into the cloud key controller. So no longer does the controller function off of my desktop, but it functions off of the Cloud Key controller. And now it's been 5 days, no disconnecting. It's been pretty great. Now I had a couple of days there where I guess it was over the weekend on Saturday. I decided, okay, got a few minutes. I will update the Unify switches because they keep, there's a firmware update. I was like, okay, well, I guess it's time to check the firmware updates. So I ran the firmware updates individually, one at a time, and each of them behaved as they should. And lo and behold, they have been up for almost 3 days. And that was the answer. The answer is the controller shouldn't be on a... Okay, so here's what the real answer was. The real answer is, I think, my PC has multiple IP addresses on the same network, and it did not like having more than one IP address. And so I think the IP addresses, they kept trying to look different IP paths and just didn't like that. So now that I have the Cloud Key controller and it just has a constant IP address, which does show up as a client, Cloud Key, because I've got this, it just never changes. The Cloud Key registers with my Unify account, and it's been solid for 3 days. So I'm going to leave it. I'm going to revisit this on Thursday and let you know. Everything's been great. The latest updates seem to be functioning correctly. You can see I've got a couple of BirdDog units. Flex is on here. This is a studio that's running. I don't have... Well, I got a camera. Hang on, I'll power up a camera. So I have an RMA camera here, which has an interesting problem that I can explain, but it's already been replaced. So I've got a P200 white camera, and she has data loss between the lens and the baseboard, which results in green artifacts in the picture. Basically, green is the symbol of data loss. And so if you are seeing green involuntarily show up on your screen, that is what is going on. Okay, so check it out. The BirdDog just came on. C8FF8 is the camera. I like the visualization options here. This makes it a lot more user-friendly when you have clients that you have to install for and then trains, the IT guy at the church how to use it. This sort of stuff is great because you can log in and say, okay, look, here's how it's done. If you have a Cloud Key, you can also register that to your account and remain their network admin, so you can pull up their network from remote sites. They can give you a call. Hey, I'm having problems. You can log in, see what's going on. Okay, so check it out. We got an address, 1.18. That worked out just fine. There's a few things I really like about this Unify interface, and I can go through that. The first is that on the device, we click on the device, here's the BirdDog camera, and here we can see what the actual power draw of the camera is at idle, which is 13.12 watts. Super handy, 14 watts now, super handy, because you can also move the camera. And I'll just, whoops, don't need that full screen. All right, you can move the camera, and right now it doesn't have any green artifacting because it's cold. It seems that when the camera warms up and runs for an extended period of time, then we have green. Oh, there's green artifacting. You can see it now. Okay, so here's the camera, and see on my hat, I've got some green artifacts there. That is data loss on the image, and as the camera warms up, it will get worse and worse and worse. So it's not a common issue, but that's the diagnosis. So it basically needs to go back to factory and the ribbon needs to be reattached, which is something that's beyond my scope of general aid. Let's go here to Unify. So Unify now, let's open this. I'm just going to move this a little bit. So at idle, looks like the camera was currently running at 15.8 watts. This should jump to like 18 or 19. Oh yeah, there it goes. So 18, 19 watts when you're moving it around. So that's why you need PoE Plus, everybody, because it's going to take 18 or 19 watts to actually move the camera. And then if we want to zoom in, let's draw, whoops. get a little closer. Let's get a lot closer. Oh gosh. All right, so super close, way too close. And you can see the data loss there on my hat. So, yeah, so now, 17, 18, 19 watts. And then when it goes back to idle, which is what it is now, we're dropping back down to 15 watts or 14 watts, somewhere in there. So it depends on what's also going on. Like when the lens is busy doing stuff and it's capturing data, if you're doing sports and that sort of thing, it's going to draw more power because the lens has to do a lot more changes and generating of colors and that sort of thing. So it actually does work a little bit more when there's movement. If you're just doing an interview and somebody's standing and you've got this, standardized bus shot that most people use for interviews, that wattage will drop off because it's not really generating much of a picture. So it'll settle down. All right. Well, between my rants and my little up close shot, the hour is almost up. So I'm happy to entertain any questions and let me know what you guys are experiencing in terms of NDI installations, anything like that. If you just want to say hey, also would be great. Let me know that you're out there. I see we've got a couple of people on various platforms, friends of mine that are on the Facebook one. That's fun. Let's go here. I'm going to jump over to YouTube real quick. Take a peek at that event. Wait, how do I jump over to YouTube? Oh, whoops. Back to dashboard. View the event on YouTube. Okay, cool. So yeah, we're there. Looks good. Nothing in the chat happening on YouTube, but that's okay. Qstream.tv/Michael Quist. Wait, is there a space there? Is that a URL that you just sent? Qstream. You know what? I normally wouldn't encourage other people to... Oops, there's an error with that link. It's probably no space, right? I probably... Nope. It's not that. Did I butcher it? Let's just say Michael or Qstream. Okay, so that's cool, but that link doesn't work for me. So you may... Oh, it's not a URL. Gotcha. Okay. Understood. What's going on, Qstream? How are you? I don't mind calling you by your handle as long as I can pronounce it. Every time I butcher Bursky, so. Because it's not Bursky, it's just B-U-R-I and then S-K, but... I have watched gamers on Twitch who can just like, I don't know, they've got some sixth sense about usernames and they can just kill it. Although, I logged on one time as BirdDogJon, and the first time they butchered it, the second time they got it right, and then I logged on as my other user account, which is John OK Newt, which is an abbreviation of my name, and yeah, it was like junk Newt or something like that. I was like, oh wow, that's... So they rhyme them off. They like take a stab at them, but yeah, that's not much. American football in DK got canceled because of COVID. Oh, fun. Wah. Yeah, there have been... I'm originally from Toronto, so I know that there's a big spike in Ontario right now. Michigan, it's actually getting better from what I can tell. So now looking again for streaming meetings, like, let me look at the COVID stats here in Oakland County, where I am, which is just the north of Detroit, above Wayne County. So yeah, we've had our second wave back in, basically started mid-July and went till September. and now the numbers are declining again. We're averaging 60 cases a day, and we are not. It's been over a week since somebody has died in my county. So now, if we go back, April 7th in my county, just my county, just Oakland County, not Michigan, just the little square that is Oakland County, 40 deaths. That was on April 7th. 22 on April 6th, 22 on April 8th, 21 on April 9th, 28, April 10 and 11, 30 on the 12th. It's like insane. That many people were dying a day. Now it's been September 28th was the latest. There were 82 new cases that day, which is a spike. But October 3rd there was 98. So anyway, it's dropped off significantly. Obviously, that's not a sickness joke. They didn't drop off, but the cases have gone down significantly in my county. So that's same here in Denmark. Hey, Patil, okay, over on YouTube. How's it going? What is going on? Thanks for joining us. Appreciate that. Thanks for hanging out on YouTube with us. Feel free to just dominate that that chat box since it's not very active. Same here in Denmark. Wow, that's a lot. Yeah, it is a lot. And if we just go to, let's just look at this. Oakland County. Okay, this is Oakland County in the greater Michigan area. So there's Detroit, where everybody's pretty much familiar with where Detroit is. This is Oakland County. Wayne County is below it, which is the actual city of Detroit. But this is Oakland County. And in this area, that's what I'm talking about. This area is where those stats are. I'm in the north here with the up this road. Well, actually up a road here. But I'm up here in the north, just south of what is Brandon Township, which is the next square up. But yeah, Oakland County has had a ridiculous explosion. So we are just seeing, oh my gosh. I am so sorry, Pandorica. Here I am talking to myself, just yakking away. This is Oakland County, this little square right here. This is Michigan, right? This little glove. And then Detroit, which is what everybody's familiar with. And then this is Oakland County. So when I talk about COVID stats, these ones, this is for that county. That's what we're looking at, which is crazy. Total deaths, 1145. Total recovered, 14, which means that there's still 3,000 people with it in the county alone, in that square. So it's crazy. Thank you for saying something, Pandorica. Appreciate that. Oh boy. Oakland County population is, it's a great question. Population of 2020 is 1.25 million people. So 1,265,000 is the population of that square. Just pack us in here, you know? It seems like a small area, but like Michigan's pretty huge. You know, like it's a pretty big area. And up here, like in this section, see Brandon Township's up here. So this is where I am. And in this blue or the green marked area, it's a lot of country and underdeveloped cities. So we're not living on top of each other here. There's very few buildings again with them. Dang it! Pandorica, thank you for being fully present in this moment. Okay, so up here with the green area, I keep forgetting. And here's Brandon Township. So this is the area that I live in, between Orion and Brandon Township. But yeah, where it's all green like this, it's just mostly underdeveloped. So I'm sure you do this. I'm sure you do that constantly in presentations. I guess I'll just leave it up there until the end of the show. I mean, I don't know how long to go here, so. Anyways, yeah. 1.25 million people in this square. And this is just north of Wayne County, which is here in Detroit, so. Crazy stuff. Hope you're staying safe out there, everybody. 5.5 million. 663 dead. 30,000 infected. Yeah. So 663 dead. So we're double you almost. And yeah, 1.25 million people. And total cases though, you've got more people infected, but more people recovered. So being a lurker for the Pixel Mint, just thought I'd say hi. Started a streaming company in London this year with 2 P200s. Well done. And 3 minis. They've been pretty solid. Thanks for your work. Hey, I will relay that to the dev team because they're really the guys that design the products. I support them. And thanks for hanging out with me. That's fun stuff. But the real magic happens in Australia while most of us are asleep. But yeah, I'll relay that to the team. I appreciate that, Pixelmint. That is very, very kind. And you should send some photos of your rig and what you're doing over to either the user group or to Eamon at BirdDogJon. He's our marketing guy. He is always down for seeing what clients are doing. So yeah, if you're probably well established now with the P200, so take some shots of them in action and show us what you're doing. We'd love to see what our clients are up to. So it's cool stuff. Alrighty. Well, it is noon officially. So that means that we have to get rolling on some of these tickets. We've been trying to knock some of them down. I've been going through the backlog of tickets this week primarily, trying to get through things that haven't been looked at in a couple of weeks if you're waiting for firmware, that sort of thing. So I'm going through the older tickets first and working my way forward. But obviously I'm going to answer any new tickets that have come in. And I said, young man, there's no need to be sad. Oh dear. That's not cool. Okay, so we are finishing up. And yoink. Wait a minute. What's going on here? And yeah, we'll see you guys on Thursday. So Thursday from 11 to 12 Eastern Standard Time, we will hang out again. Bring your NDI questions. Hopefully I won't have a rant like I did this week, but just say no to static networks. They are not your friend, and we will address more of that on Thursday. So thanks for hanging out. Thanks for being a part of my stream, and on Thursday at 11 Eastern Standard Time, we'll be back to do more NDI. Hopefully won't have to talk about COVID too much more. I will now remove the desktop screen. So consciously make another takeaway. Just say no to static networks. They are not your friend. That is the takeaway. Absolutely. That is exactly how you should feel about them. Okay, cool. You guys take it easy. Appreciate you. We'll see you next time. And come back on Thursday, 11 o'clock Eastern Standard. We'll do it again. Cheers, guys.